afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the Taubman Museum of Art and our community conversations. I'm Cindy Peterson, the museum's executive director, and it is wonderful to see everybody here today. Thank you for your interest, your advocacy, your membership, your support, your volunteerism. That's what makes it possible to bring people in art together like today for learning, for discovery, and for enjoyment. And as we continue, this community conversation is around trauma, healing, and art. With guests from our region, the panel discussion, Dr. Robert L. Trestman, Decca Knight, and Jennifer Amateis. And our special guest and friend, Caledonia Curry. And Caledonia will be joining us from Zoom. We're so excited that she has been sharing her work and her 20-year retrospective with our community. It has been a phenomenal journey to work with Callie, her team, our team, and the Turner Carroll Gallery to curate and organize this exhibition and the accompanying educational programming like this conversation today. A thank you to all our sponsors you've seen in the pre-slides as well as in the exhibition. And how many of you have already seen the Swoon exhibition? Wonderful. That's what I told Callie. She said, how many? I said, about 80%, if not more. It is open, of course, after this conversation. The museum's open till 5 p.m. today. The exhibition runs through March 10th. We look forward to seeing you come back, go through the exhibition again, and especially after this conversation. And it is a ticketed exhibition, but free for members, youth, and special community groups. And before I give a brief introduction to Callie, I'd like to remind everyone. So today we'll be discussing various aspects of trauma and healing. And we want this experience to be a safe space for everyone. If you feel that you may be getting activated or overwhelmed, please take care of yourself. You can go out, take a walk, get a drink of water, whatever is best for you. And to facilitate questions today, and for the panel, there are cards, and there'll be continually cards. Katrina King-Sing, our Deputy Director of Community Engagement, has those, as well as other staff. And the panel will also be here a little bit afterwards as well. Please silence your phones as we have the conversation so it doesn't interfere with the audio as well. Emergency exits are to the side, to the back, and we have restrooms in our theater lobby. So Caledonia Curry, also known as Swoon, is a contemporary artist and filmmaker recognized around the world for her pioneering vision of public artwork. Through intimate portraits, immersive installations, and multi-year community-based projects, as you've seen in our exhibition, she has spent over 20 years exploring the depths of human complexity by mobilizing her artwork to fundamentally re-envision the communities we live in toward a more just and equitable world. She is the best known as one of the first women street artists to gain international recognition in a male-dominated field, pushing the conceptual limits of this genre and paving the way for a generation of women street artists. Her recent work has focused on the relationship of trauma and addiction through community partnerships that center compassion and the transformational power of art. Callie draws on her personal history, growing up in an opioid-addicted family, as a catalyst for connection and healing. Over the past 10 years, she has founded and developed collaborative, multi-year projects that address crises ranging from natural disasters to the disasters to the opioid epidemic. And now, I want to just introduce Callie, and thank you, Callie, for being here. We're going to switch over so that she's been able to see you the whole time. And so now, Scotty's going to go ahead and and put Callie on the screen. We're so glad Callie can join us. She texted me, she said, I just got off a red eye from California. She's been doing a project on the West Coast, back on the East Coast. Callie, it's wonderful to have you here, and we've got you up on the screen.
It's so nice to be back, connecting with everyone at the Taubman because, like I said, while I was there, Roanoke has just been an incredible place. Both the Taubman's ability to really show and understand this kind of 20-year breadth of my work, and then also just the really creative community that you guys have. So I'm thrilled to see you guys again. And so my thought today was just to share a few pictures with you guys, mostly stuff that's in the exhibition, kind of give it a little context, and just talk a little tiny bit about, the way that kind of the journey of mental health really became core to my work about 10 years ago. I was an artist for many years. I grew up as a teenager, art was always kind of part of my mental health journey in a way that was totally unarticulated to me. I didn't understand it. I just knew that like all the wild energies and all the kind of, angstiness that if I could get into making, that there was just like a calmness and a focus, and that I felt really rewarded for it, that I got this kind of positive feedback where, in a time and space where I think I really needed that as a kid that was growing up, in a family that was struggling with addiction, and I had parents that loved me a lot, but they maybe weren't always as able to kind of see me as I needed them to be, so I was doing my thing, making my art, street art, community-based projects, all kinds of things, and I was thinking about how art could kind of come in moments when like maybe a community was having like a natural disaster or something. But what I don't think I really fully realized was that the reason I had identified that art could come in times of disaster was because of the way that art had played such a role for me. But like I said, it was still kind of unconscious. And then in 2013, my mom passed away suddenly from lung cancer. And that was the first moment in my life where it was like, stop what you're doing, spend time with your mom. But also while I was doing that, it was like the only thing I could do was draw a portrait of her, a portrait of her life cycle and of the death process and of what that, was like in many ways. And this was one of those portraits that felt like it kind of saved me while I was making it. And it also like led me down a path that was like, hey, this is going to be core to your process. And then I found that as I started to share, that we are all going through loss. There's not a person in this room, I'm going to bet, that hasn't lost somebody important to them. And so when you start to talk about that, it's a thing that everybody understands or is going to understand. And so I started to make these portraits like this one, where, because I lost a mom who, like I said, loved me, but was really unable to be a mom in certain ways. Um, I also kind of tied this together with a portrait of a friend of mine who was like this incredible mother who was able to really care for her children in a way that I almost felt like I needed in that moment. And so I drew her as this kind of celebration of nurturing. And she's kind of also holding my mom and her dying cycle, and my mom and her kind of more difficult phases are kind of pictured within this. And so I started to find that that drawing was this very deep way to think through things, and that like it's a language in ourselves, and it becomes a language that we can share with other people. And a similar thing happened when very shortly after my father made a decision to take his own life. He didn't feel comfortable aging. He felt scared about what was next. And he just wanted to be in control of it. And that was a very difficult thing for me in particular at that moment, because I had just lost my mom, and because my dad had so often really rescued us when my mom's mental health was in crisis. And so to have him make this decision, it was another one of those moments where I was like, I'm on earth by my fingernails right now. Like I am barely hanging in here. And so drawing this portrait, you're carving into the linoleum, and it's like this way of like, just stay with it, stay with the pain, stay with the moment, stay with, the all of the good and bad of it. And so again, this portrait kind of became this vessel for me to really see that, like, the art can be one of the practices that just keeps our feet on this ground, you know? And 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 then kind of having discovered that and losing my parents, it really forced me into this place where it was like, no more playing at the surface. You're going to have to go into the depth of your life right now, and you're going to really have to look at these things that are coming up because you're grieving. And so you're also thinking about your childhood, and you're thinking about your family, and you're thinking about all these things. And what I really came to terms with was that, much of my family suffered deeply with mental health issues, from temporary psychotic breaks to schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder. um and I came to kind of understand that in my family, of course we have our kind of predispositions and our sensitivity psychologically, but that so much of what had really fostered the deep breaks that were happening in my family had to do with trauma being passed on, and also the silence around it and the shame of not being able to really put anything that people were going through into context. And so I made this piece called the Medea, and you can listen to the audio in the exhibition and kind of learn a little bit more about it. But it's essentially a portrait about psychological fragmentation that tries to sort of use some of the images that I had drawn on, and some new images, to kind of repiece myself back together, kind of through the creation of the piece. And it was very vulnerable and terrifying to make, but it was also incredibly rewarding. And so I found that I wanted to start a work with other people who might be going through similar things to me, but hadn't really had a chance to think about them, as much like I hadn't. And so I worked with Philly Mural Arts, and you'll see this portrait in the exhibition as well. And they had programs, working with folks who were in incarceration or coming out of incarceration, or in drug rehab. And by that point, I was starting to understand that you don't really end up um, in a place where your life is totally destabilized to the point that you're living on the street, or you might be, doing kind of things that are not healthy for you or your community. That, like, that's not really happening unless other forces have acted against you and are sort of getting you to a place where you don't feel stable and you're not able to make good decisions. And so this is a portrait of a person named George, who was one of the first people in the program that I realized that us sharing our stories with each other, like, I was helping him understand his life, and he was helping me understand my life. And it was really this thing about how, when you share with community, everybody gets to grow. Um, and there's another portrait within the space, of a woman named Sonia. And I loved, connecting with this person through art, because we could say things like, she actually had epilepsy, because as it related to her trauma. And I said, what does it feel like before a seizure happens? And she was able to really talk it through and say, it feels like lightning. It feels like, I'm getting these flashes in my body. And so she was able to really draw, both kind of those moments, but also she was somebody who was able to share so compassionately and lovingly. And so I think in this portrait, I was trying to sort of capture all of that. And, you see in her face that she's a very tender human being. And then you also see a lot of the experiences that she feels, when she's experiencing the difficult parts of her life. Um, and then the kind of final room that you see in the exhibition is a moment where I realized that there's a part of my psyche that only speaks fairy tale. And so when I was a little kid, my mom had a very, very scary psychotic breakdown. And what I kind of understood later in life is that she was trying to express her trauma, but she couldn't. It was so suppressed from her awareness. And so she expressed it in the language of a psychotic breakdown. She thought aliens were coming. She thought we had to escape them in these very dangerous ways. Um, and when I was growing up, older, as an adult, trying to, go through therapy, trying to understand these experiences, I started to, after one of the sessions, I wrote this little story, and I said, there's two little girls, and they're living with a wicked witch. And, they're in this kind of spooky neighborhood, and there's dark forces that are surrounding the house. And the wicked witch is in this fog, and she's struggling, and she's under the sway of these very intoxicating and dark forces. And the little girls are trying to navigate the world, understanding how did they get in this place. um and so this was another one of those phases, and I'm still working on this story and this film, but where I found that once I could retell this experience to myself as a fairy tale, that I could sit with it differently, and I could kind of, feel just more stable and more grounded and more connected to others. Um, and so yeah, that's about all I wanted to share, just in terms of some of the little threads of the way of like the process of really, kind of understanding my own journey through art has happened. So now I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any questions.
Hi, Callie. It's great seeing you. And thank you so much for everything you've been doing and are doing. One of the issues that comes up for us is uh, we would love to learn from you how you have engaged the community. What kind of techniques have you been using to share your art in a transformative way to help community members deal with and overcome the experiences of trauma?
Thank you so much, and thank you, and thank you. It's nice to see you. um, So, I think this is one of those things that there are so many people who've answered this question in so many ways. And so I just have some little, moments. But one of them, some of the most enjoyable experiences that I have been working with a group in Philly called Philadelphia Mural Arts. And the reason that I love working with them so much is because they are so fearless and so dedicated to meeting people where they are. And so they have, at one point, I worked with them at a shop front that was opened up in the very center of the opiate crisis, and it was would allow people to come in, wash their hands, have a cup of tea, and make art together. And what they talked about was how sometimes when people are in a really dire straits, it's actually kind of a lot to say, okay, now go to rehab. Sometimes you want to start that conversation slower, right? Sometimes you want to just be like, what's up? What's going on? We're not going to force you to, this is not about forcing you to do anything today. This is not about saying you have to sign on to even a religious program or a rehab program or any of these. It's just about saying, what's up with you today? How are you? Do you want to talk to a friend? Do you want to get your hands into some paint? And that actually becomes like a first step, that then, after you've done this 3 or 4 times together, then maybe somebody will start saying, oh, like, what is going on down there? I heard they do have like a program down there. How's it working? um but that there's so many ways that, like, when people, trauma is a trust injury, right? That you don't it becomes very hard to trust the world. It becomes very hard to trust others. And so providing spaces where people are doing something as easy and innocuous and lovely and beautiful as just making art together, that's trust building. That's, and it's also like, you can talk about things when you're making art sometimes that you maybe can't talk about if you're somebody just looking you in the face and going, how are you doing? Where you're like, what if we're doing this third thing actually? Or, and then the conversation kind of happens while we're, painting these beautiful birds, or, cutting up something, or, finding a way to kind of make it so that there's more happening than just putting somebody on the spot to kind of share their story. So like those are some of the moments. The Kensington storefront in Philadelphia is one of those things that I always, really think and look to. um, and then, and there's been a ton of ways, even in Haiti after the earthquake, people said, you know, there's all this helplessness, there's all this fear, we don't know what the hell to do next, but that actually just getting together and building one thing, and knowing that we're doing this thing together, there's some money coming in, we're going to be able to eat lunch, there's, a few stabilizing forces, but just the act of like we're able to build together, I think it calms people down in this like really profound way, and makes you feel that there is some guidance and some center when kind of the world has lost its center. And so I think there's so many ways that art and creativity can do that. And like those are just a couple that I can think of.
Hi, Callie. My name is Decca, and I'm a therapist here in the Valley. One thing that I so appreciated when you were sharing your story is when you were talking about your process and doing your art, and that kind of staying with the feeling and staying with the emotion and then going deeper into the emotion. And I know that so many people that, come to us for help, that's a very terrifying and overwhelming thing to do at first. So can you talk a little bit about what you might say to somebody who's really scared to sit there with that emotion for a while, and what that process was like for you and how it helped you to kind of move through?
Yeah. Well, the way that I used to talk about it way back in the day, before I think this I'm so happy that like the public, we're all having these conversations. I feel like in a way that we weren't doing 20 years ago. Maybe I just wasn't seeing them, but I really think that this is new. And I'm so happy for it, and I'm really happy to meet you guys, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Because I know that there's, art and art therapists, and there's just so many people are finding things all the time that I just love. But the way that I used to talk about it is that I would say it's like there's a force that's pushing through my chest, and it's like gonna suffocate me. But if I can get one moment, if I can get one little reprieve, I could like flip it. It's like it's on a and then I could take that same force and I could just push it, push it, push it, push it with the same force that was suffocating me. Now it's going into that block, and the block can take a lot of force. That, carving that is like that can take endless force, right? And I think that's why I loved it, because the intensity that's weighing down on you can weigh down into something else. Um, and so I think that's one of the things I think about is like, how can we take some of that pressure and just switch the direction that it's going? But like when people are scared to stay with the emotion, what I say to myself, because honestly, all these years later, I'm literally just discovering this, is that I still have moments where I cannot tolerate certain emotions, or I think I can't. And what I've discovered recently is in the moments when I can, is that like it lasts what, 20 minutes? And you're like, oh, I can do 20 minutes. I could do 20 minutes of anything. And the fact that it's coming and you think that you're gonna die, and the shade, and it's gonna kill you, and it's, there's a dark place, it's gonna be totally unnavigable. But in fact, it's like it's not more than 20 minutes. And the other thing that I find, you know, as I start to share this stuff, is that every time I go to share, I think this is too gross. It's too weird. It's too uncool. It's too shameful. It's too awkward. It's gonna freak people out. I'm gonna be the weirdo. I'm gonna be the victim. I'm gonna be messy. And no one has ever, when people can't stay with it, they just, they just kind of back up a little, and that can feel weird. But what happens in that space is that the people who are ready to have the conversation come forward. And so I have been so shocked by how much less alone I have felt. And I would just also share that with people, to just be like, trust it, because other people it's a relief, it's a balm, it's a building of the social network when other people hear you sharing those things that seem so, like what even is this, um and that like I think that we do find that we show up for each other, and that you find your community in a different way. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Callie. Thanks for your insights, for sharing the questions for our community. And we're gonna take that moment to move to the panel discussion, and with our regional panel here, and continue that conversation here with our community. This gave us a fabulous place to be, to see your artwork, to hear from you. And to hear that personal. So thank you again. Thanks, Callie, and look forward to seeing you soon. And I know everybody is excited to go back up into the gallery or see it for the first time as we have our conversation. Get some sleep.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd love to introduce our panel. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Bob Trestman, and PhD, MD.
Recording stopped.
He joined Carilion in April of 2017 as the chair of psychiatry. And Dr. Trestman is a nationally recognized expert in psychiatry and population health. and has an extensive background in education and research, which we'll hear today. Dr. Trestman previously was a tenured professor of medicine and psychiatry at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine with a joint appointment as professor of nursing. He served as executive director of Correctional Managed Healthcare, a division of the University of Connecticut Health Center. And in this role, he led a health system that provided global health care to all inmates within the Connecticut Department of Correction. Prior to that, he served in numerous academic and leadership roles at the University of Connecticut, Mount Sinai Medical Center, and the Bronx Veterans Affairs Medical Center. But we are glad that he's with us here in Roanoke, and Dr. Trestman has lectured and consulted nationally and internationally, authored and co-authored over 180 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and commentaries, and is the senior editor of the Oxford Textbook of Correctional Psychiatry. He serves our community in a number of capacities. And he also serves as a board trustee of the Tallman Museum of Art, which we are thankful for to have you here. And also a special thank you to Carilion Clinic, who is a sponsor of this conversation as well as the exhibition. And with that, I welcome Dr. Bob Trestman as well as the panel, and I'll hand it over to Bob to join us. Thank you.
I am delighted with this opportunity for us to speak with you, to talk honestly and openly about essentially the human experience. Joining me here are two people who are very well known to the mental health community and to the community at large. First is Decca Knight, who has served the community in many different ways and continues to do so in her collaborative work in family services of Roanoke Valley, as well as her leadership in the trauma-informed community network. Decca, thank you. Jennifer Amateis is a therapist who has served, again, the community in many different aspects, works with us at Carilion, and is one of the therapists who is helping us build the Center for Grief and Healing, providing a range of services throughout the community. So with that, I think we have a few minutes really to talk about the experiences. And many of you have already had an opportunity to see the exhibition. And part of the challenge of, how do we experience our lives? Giving, as Callie shared with us, essentially she didn't know how to give voice to her inner experiences, to the difficulties, to the trauma, to the adverse experiences she had growing up, until she was already an adult and had to learn to live and to cope with that. So what I'm hoping we can do is just talk a bit about this, and keep in mind, there are Katrina and others who will be able to give you over there. Just wave your hand if you had a question. We're going to collect questions in writing to share with us, so we can try to answer them later in this brief time we have together. So if I may, let me turn first to Decca, just to talk a bit about, art isn't a single format. Art is everything. Art, as we've seen, can be expressed in words and in poetry and in our writing. It can be expressed visually. It can be expressed in song. So from your view, how do you see the value of art? How does that enable our conversations in healing?
Well, I love that question. So I started out years ago as a play therapist. And for those of you guys who don't know what play therapy is, it's playing with kids, right? To get them to be able to give voice to their experiences. And that is part of kind of the expressive arts, right? And part of a way to approach kids. And actually adults love to play too. And a lot of times the way that adults play is through art or music. And you know, some of the individuals that I've worked with over the past 20 years, they have gone through maybe numerous therapists where the therapist has just sat across from them, just like Callie did on the screen, and said, let's talk, right? And for many people who have had really complex trauma, that can be really overwhelming and scary. For them to have to give voice to it that early on without having some other way to relate to somebody, right? So maybe that's relating through art, maybe that's relating through music, maybe it's relating through play. And you know, any therapist who is working with somebody who's relating in that way, you know, hopefully is not going to say, well, tell me what that means, tell me what that means, you know, that they allow people to build that trust over time so that the person can tell their story in a way that resonates with them, that isn't scary, that's at their pace, that is comfortable for them, and that allows time to build that trust. And I think, as she said that multiple times when she was speaking, that trust building is so important because there's so much shame associated, right, with some of the things that some individuals have gone through, and they have learned to stuff that, right, into a place where it's inaccessible to them, right? But they do that because it is helpful to them so that they can function in their normal day-to-day life. But how are we going to get at that in a way that gives them a voice that they're comfortable with? And I think that's why doing any kind of expressive type of arts or play therapy is less intrusive for so many people. And they can give you their story in a way that feels comfortable to them at the pace that feels comfortable to them, which I love.
And Jennifer, from your experiences, you know, you've worked with many different populations. Now, you know, in the Center for Grief and Healing, what potential roles do you see that art play in the real world of helping people cope with grief?
You know, just like Decca, I started as a play therapist, still am a play therapist, but when I transitioned to the center, I thought, gosh, this is going to be so different. I've been working with trauma, with children and families who've had attachment disruptions and relationship disruptions, but grief is exactly the same. And I love that Callie made the point that we're all grievers multiple times over. We grieve things that are death-related and non-death related. We grieve all kinds of transitions in our life. And so as I started to sit with people, it was also familiar. And art, I think like Decca was saying and Callie was saying, when we can put something, when we can externalize a feeling, a sensation, it gives us a safe enough distance to be able to manipulate it, to explore it. It doesn't feel quite so overwhelming as it does when it's in our head and it's swirling. You know, trauma is also stored in a different part of the brain. So I can tell you the facts of something that happened to me, but that doesn't mean that it taps into how it felt in that moment, what I thought in that moment, how I experienced that. I'm kind of detached when I'm telling you cognitively what happened. And so when I can express something visually or with sand tray or with play, that gets me into the body. And so I think we can help people create deeper levels of understanding and insight through art and through exploring the art rather than asking the invasive questions of, well, what was that like?
So you just raised a very, very important element in this. That, you know, we as people live in the world. We are engaged with so many different things. We have, for the last few hundred years, talked about the mind and the body, and we've simplified things to think as though those are two very different entities with a clear, bright line between the two. The practice that we have was useful as a very reductionistic approach to help us learn about our world. But now we realize it is reductionistic and it's wrong. So could you talk just a bit more about how that kind of synergism between the body, our emotions, our thoughts, play out in your experiences helping people overcome trauma?
Gosh. Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, thoughts come into our mind all day, every day, about everything. And when they pop in, oftentimes we attach to them as if that's the truth. This is the way that it is. I thought it, and so this is what is. And so we spend a lot of time, whether it's through kind of challenging them cognitively, what else could be true? How do I feel when I think that thought? That our emotions and our thoughts are all connected. And then of course what we do as a result of that. Our actions are all connected. So helping people understand that connection, because I think a lot of times we're not aware of the thought, we're just acting and reacting. And so people come in and go, gosh, I don't know why I did that. I didn't want to do that. That's not how I wanted to respond. But there's not the awareness that, that triggered something from a really long time ago, or, that was trauma, that was my trauma talking there, or that was my trauma reacting rather than my true self. That's not who I am. And so, pulling that apart and understanding the connection between all of it. And then so when I can address the trauma, when I can sort of create safety for myself and regulation with my emotions, then I'm in control of my thinking and I have the space to be able to challenge, whatever is causing the stress.
I think too, I appreciate how in our field over the past 10 years or so, we've done more somatic work. So somatic is understanding that the body is part of the process when it's storing trauma. Storing trauma in your nervous system, storing trauma in your muscles, in your brain. And we've really begun to understand through different types of somatic therapy that a lot of times that needs to be part of the process to work through complex trauma. And I really appreciate what Callie said when I asked her the question about sitting with emotion, pushing into the art, if you guys remember her saying that, because that pressure, right, that moving the body in certain ways can be very, very helpful for sitting with tough emotion and working through tough emotion. And for a long time in our field, we did not address that. We were very top-heavy, meaning that we were top-down approach. And now we are getting to types of therapy that are more bottom-up, meaning that we're taking into account where that trauma is stored in the body and how it's processed. Because a lot of times we were seeing that sometimes when we were just doing a cognitive approach, that sometimes that didn't get to those feelings in the body that may come up when somebody is triggered or activated or overwhelmed, and teaching them too how to work through that and sit with that and what that might feel like in the body. And it's okay to sit with that for even 5 seconds if you can. My clients and I talk about that all the time, that let's just sit with that discomfort, and if it's 3 seconds, that's great. And then maybe we'll get to 5 seconds next time, and then we'll get to 10, right? But we have been programmed to avoid those sensations so much in our body that then again it kind of sticks it in our what we call our soma, which is our body, right? It sticks it in our psyche and our brain, and it sticks it in our soma. So I just appreciate that she tapped into that with her movement and how she was working through it during those times that were really tough for her.
So we've now been talking more about the soma, the body, the experience. I think for most of us, we can at times reflect or be told, you look upset, your shoulders are really tense, or your fists are clenched. You must be upset or angry. I mean, just as one element in the linkage between what we think, what we feel, how we physically express ourselves in the world. And so, can we explore just a bit more about how you see people when you're working with people, with the differences that occur over time in terms of even their posture, their facial expressions, just the relationships between the fact, what we separate between our thoughts and our physical expression.
I thought Callie spoke to this beautifully about the self-doubt and the self-criticism, that what I'm dealing with, what I'm feeling is weird and no one can relate, or I'm going to be judged negatively for how I'm thinking and feeling about this. It's just so common. It's the most common thing that people come in and feel like I'm grieving wrong. This is, everybody else around me is dealing with this better or seems to have moved on. And I think the truth is, some people are better at masking sometimes, and so a big part of what we talk about is that grieving well is about showing and dealing with grief, not about tucking it away. And so, I think that when we're struggling to contain something, it's on the whole body curls inward. Posture is in, hair is covering the face. There's very little eye contact. There's very little confidence in the ability that I know something, or that, or that I have something valuable to offer or to share or to be explored here. And there's lots of research out there that shows there's 100 different therapeutic modalities we can use. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but the very best thing we can do is form a relationship. That's the real vehicle of change. And so I think when we can connect and can help soothe that part that's thinking I'm not okay, or I'm not accepted, or I'm not valued, that can relax. Shoulders drop, breathing slows, fidgeting rests. There's more eye contact, there's more engagement, there's more emotion that's expressed on the face rather than sort of that flatness. So yeah, there's absolutely, I think the way that we feel is expressed and worn in our body and on our face.
I also think to add to that, one thing that, sometimes individuals with very complex trauma are very hypervigilant. And what that means is a lot of times they'll go into spaces, like if they were in here with me sitting up here, maybe looking at everybody's face, looking at everybody's posture, kind of scanning for threat. My patients tell me that all the time, that they'll go to Walmart, they're scanning for threat. They walk down the street, they're scanning for threat. Because everybody may be potentially somebody that may harm them. And that's been kind of coded in their brain, unfortunately, especially if they lived in a household where there was a lot of threat very often. Right, and so that hypervigilance is, expressed in a lot of ways that Jennifer was talking about. Just kind of a lot of times come in, office and sit like this on the edge of the seat, right? Because they have to be ready to bolt, and I get that, right? And so our job as therapists is to provide a really safe space for them to be able to relax in the seat, right? To be able to be a person who is safe for them, and to really be very self-aware of how we react to things they say. Right, so that we're not feeding into that hypervigilance, right, and making them feel more overwhelmed or more ashamed of what they're sharing. And I think there's this really neat thing that we talk about in trauma-informed care a lot, which is the work that I do in community. And we have these neurons in our brain called mirror neurons, right? And they mirror the emotions and the behaviors of people in front of us. It's a biological thing that we all share together. And I think, especially for people who are very hypervigilant, if we are able, as people who are supporting them, to be, that safe, calm, regulated, aware of our voice, aware of how we take up space, that can really help to calm down their nervous system and make them feel safe. We can tell somebody all day that you're safe. I can say that 1,000,000 times to somebody with my words, right? But a lot of times, how people present do not feel safe, right? So I could say you're safe, but if I'm sitting over here and I'm looking agitated, I don't feel safe, right? So showing that and supporting that in a way I think is really, really important. And then you'll see, just like Jennifer said, like that is more important than anything else. That safe relationship is the most important thing.
So for many, a lot of the trauma that we live with happened when we were children. For some, it had to do with a break in trust. Trust in our social fabric, a trust in what we expect in our schools, a trust in what we expect in our neighborhood, or a trust in what we expect from our parents or caregivers. And so one of the challenges we have in the real world when we try to work and support people is, how do we build inside someone the ability to trust again? And so what role might art play in that, either in the creation of art or the experience of it? How might that contribute to being able to trust enough to be willing to create a meaningful relationship?
I'll go for it. I'll try. I think a lot of times, a lot of individuals that I've worked with, they internalize that sense of distrust towards themselves as well, right? So if they did not have trust in their relationships, in their community, in their schools, then they begin to internalize that and they don't even trust that they can do things. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about expressive means, because if you can find a way that they can trust themselves to tell their story, then that in addition builds the trust for them internally, where they can then begin to lean on other people to trust them. but it's kind of this internal process that any kind of expressive process can do. And I remember thinking, we mentioned sand tray therapy earlier, and maybe a lot of people don't know what that is, but that's where you have this big sand tray and a lot of little miniatures that you use in it, and kids love it, adults love it too, but it's being able to kind of create a world in that sand tray with these miniatures, and it's beautiful to be able to see with kids, for instance, how they begin to be empowered internally when they're able to express themselves without words, and how they can tell us their story and trust the process with you as their therapist and with the sand and with the miniatures. And so I think a lot of it is being able to see that I can do things when maybe my experience in life is that I wasn't capable, that my world, my family taught me that I wasn't capable. And so that's what I think art can do. And I think the other thing that sometimes is confusing for people, like if they come and do art therapy or expressive therapy, is they think they have to make this beautiful piece of art like Callie makes, right? And that's not true at all, right? It's more about the process, right, than the end result. Because the process is where the healing is, and you heard her talk about how healing that process was for her. So it's not always the end result. We don't have to make some, amazing piece of art, and giving people that permission to just lean into the process rather than think about the end goal. Because a lot of times the perfectionistic tendencies come up there, like it has to look a certain way. It doesn't. It's just about your journey.
I was thinking, I think when people come in with grief or trauma, they see it as the problem, the enemy. This is the thing I want to make go away. And we talk a lot about how, the brain's response, the body's response to trauma is survival. That's the way that we get through really difficult experiences. And so it's all intended to be helpful. It's our brain and our body's best way of protecting us when a circumstance is completely overwhelming or beyond our ability to cope. And so beginning to see aspects of that are good and that there's wisdom in your trauma, I think is really helpful for people to see that, and to sort of convey through the way that we're relating to them and to their art, their process of art, is that they are the expert on themselves. They have the healing within themselves. I don't have the answer for you. I don't have a piece of advice that's going to make everything better. There is no such thing. But it's being curious and open and willing to sort of circle around and expand the metaphor and understand it deeper and understand where that comes from. How did I develop that? How has that helped me? How has that gotten me to the place that I am? Even though all this time I've judged that it's done something wrong or bad in my life, it helped me in a time when I needed it most. So, so shifting our perspective, shifting the person's perspective around their anxiety or their trauma response to something, and kind of like Decca was saying, really being curious with them. There's a lot of anxiety about creating. Once we make a product, it's out there to be judged as good or bad, right or wrong. And so if we can stay in the space of like, I noticed you used this color. Tell me what that was. What does that mean to you? How does it feel when you look at this? It's all reinforcing that they are the masters of their own creation, and really have control over what feels very helpless and out of control.
So the language we use matters. It does. The words we choose make a difference. The word trauma, outside of physical trauma from a car crash, wasn't really used in psychology, psychiatry before the 1980s. It's relatively recent. And in terms of the community and our willingness and comfort in starting to talk openly about it, as Callie mentioned, no, she wasn't missing anything. It's really just been the last 10 or 15 years, at best, that as a community, we're really beginning to talk about it. And that in and of itself is beginning to create a sense of trust among us to be able to come forward to share with it. We remember, years and years ago after World War I, World War II, you experienced trauma and you just sucked it up. You just didn't talk about it. You went on with your life. But all the scars were there, and they manifested in sometimes very painful ways for our families and friends. We have an opportunity now. And one of the things that I'd just like to ask our panelists, there's a difference in many ways between an individual creating art and a group creating art. Whether it's something as big as a community quilt or tiles that people create individually and then bring together. Could you share any thoughts about how art might come through either individual therapy or in group therapies?
I really appreciate the group process, that people can share an experience that they think only they have gone through. That they feel alone, they feel scared, and to be able to go into a space where other people may have gone through similar things and hear how they navigated it, or to see how they navigated in their art. I love doing group art projects with individuals because, especially if you're bringing something together like doing a quilt or doing a collective art piece, how people kind of flow with each other. So once they kind of get into this state of, I'm comfortable in this space, I'm comfortable sharing this space, people understand me, then that collective art helps them not feel so alone. And I think that's huge, because us as individual therapists, we can say all day, well, you're not alone, right? These are how many people in our society experience tough things. Those percentages don't mean anything until you're able to sit in a space with people who have experienced the same thing. And so I think that's the beauty of being able to be in creative spaces with others. And I love that Callie does that, all across the world, and has the ability to bring that into spaces and sit with people through tough things and show them that there are other ways to process what they've been through.
We run multiple support groups through the Center for Grief and Healing based exactly on that premise that, when we can connect with others that have been through a similar experience to us, we feel better, we feel connected, we don't feel so isolated and alone. And so I think that what we use a lot of expressive arts in our groups as a way of opening up and facilitating, kind of breaking down that hesitancy that people have when you walk into a room and think, gosh, I don't know if I can be the first person to start talking here, to start sharing. And so we'll do some piece of art and have everybody show that. And I think, art facilitates. The reason we're drawn to look at art is that we experience something when we look at what other people have created. And so I think we can make insights about ourselves even by somebody else's sharing. The lens that we're looking through when we see that art means something to us based on our life experiences. And so that same thing can happen in a group, in a community. So absolutely.
Thank you. We have several questions from the audience, and let me share some of these as we have time. How are we addressing loneliness as a community?
I think about all the work that I do in community, and one of the positions that I'm in now, I'm able to work in our housing developments, right, and be on the ground, like boots on the ground, with individuals who are going through tough things. And I think when I started that a couple years ago, a lot of the people, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of COVID, were feeling really, really lonely. And sometimes that loneliness was getting deeper, and it was turning into depression and isolation and anxiety. And I think, being able to bring people into spaces that feel safe. I think a lot of individuals that I interact with were feeling really lonely and isolated because they didn't feel safe in the world, right? So being able to provide safe spaces maybe in their community, rather than saying, come to us, sometimes can bridge that gap. Because sometimes when you're feeling really isolated, it's very hard. Sometimes you don't have that energy to be able to get to a space, to go across town, to do those types of things. So I love the kind of community work and community groups, because that allows people to take a little bitty step out, right, of that isolation in a way that feels safe to them, rather than a big leap. I also think that it can really be addressed. There's so many online support groups too, right? Sometimes people are worried about being face-to-face. And so there are a lot of ways that you can get that access if you want to on your phone, and start to whittle away at some of that anxiety or that loneliness maybe that has manifested over time, and start to make those little steps by being in that kind of virtual space with someone until maybe a more collective space in person feels different.
In my role, I'm much more focused on the individual level, but I think, all of our support groups are hybrid, meaning you can join online as well as be in person in the room, so that there are people living in more remote rural areas or have barriers to access to coming in, or just feel a little bit too intimidated to come into a room full of people, they can join through the safety of their computer first. We have a grief meetup once this is a little bit of this doesn't address the entire community, it's niche specific, but we have a grief meetup for that reason. Just a social event that gets people re-engaged with life that maybe have otherwise been really isolated before. So trying to community education events, trying to go out and talk about grief and connect people with others that are interested in the same or experiencing the same situation.
And let's end on a very global, fascinating, kind of magical question. If you could eliminate trauma in someone's life, just eliminate all of their past trauma in just a few hours, would you?
I say no, and I think that every single person that came to my office would wholeheartedly disagree. They would say, what in the world, that's exactly what I need, is for somebody to make this go away as fast as possible. But there's so much post-traumatic growth that happens through the struggle and through the healing process. You know, we use the metaphor of the butterfly all the time. It doesn't turn into a butterfly unless it goes through that struggle of sort of breaking through the cocoon. And that when we do that for them, that the development doesn't happen. And so I think when you've been unfortunate enough to have experienced trauma, whatever it may be from, I think the process is the healing. It's not the point at the end.
Yeah, I think probably all of us up here have heard this before, like, where's your magic wand, Decca? That's what I always hear, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, I didn't bring it today. Because a lot of times systems and individuals think that change needs to happen quickly, or that I want instant relief, and I get that, right? I get sitting with something so long that you want some relief. And so I think in those couple of hours, if I can give you a little bit of relief, where you can feel safe for a short period of time, that begins that journey. And I think that post-traumatic growth and that resilience, sometimes the word resilience is hard for people to sit with, because sometimes it can be like, well, I only have to be resilient because I went through hard things, right? But sometimes that resilience, can build other aspects of a person that help them to navigate future hard things, right? Sometimes you have more of a roadmap if you've been through something than if you never had. And so I would like it to be in the middle. Is that an answer?
I think, yes, and I think that is an answer. We do, in part, as a process of therapy, want people to begin to feel better, because without hope, everything else fades away. We need hope. That's what we live on. And life is a process of creativity and creation. Part of what we're hoping to do in therapy is help people to see that that is possible for each and every one of us. The role of art in and of itself is a process of creation and creativity that can give voice to that. And the degree to which art can be part of the healing process, I think many of us will experience, even as we go through the exhibition of Swoon, or frankly, any art. Because part of it is the expression of joy and of pain and of the human experience. So if I may, let me thank you all for being here, and encourage you, if you haven't already seen the exhibition that Swoon has accumulated over 20 years and really helped us share with our community. And with that, let me turn it back to Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, Decca, and Jennifer. So thanks for sharing, thanks for the information, but also that conversation. And thank you for your questions that you submitted. And for Callie to be here with us. And we've also have community resources that you've provided for, that continued question. And we're gonna put those up on the screen. Also at the registration table, there's some information to pick up too, along with, you'll see
products from Swoon that we have, both original artwork, prints, and things that she's developed with us that you can also, there's journals. So another method in terms of that was one that was very special to her to give back to the community on that part. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. And come back often. Again, Swoon is open till March 10th. Tickets are at the front desk. And we have a couple other stuff coming up. Lunar New Year on February 10th, 12 to 2. That following Sunday, Community Arts Reach at 2 p.m. And then in 2 Sundays from now, another community conversation. I encourage you to come back. It's about the David Ramey, Gainsborough and Beyond. We will have, I hear, yeah. So if you haven't seen that exhibition, please do. And Dr. Carla James Jackson will be here from the Higher Education Center talking about the Gainsborough History Project along with Jordan Bell, art historian with Gainsborough Revisited. And then on March 1st and 2nd is Roanoke Arts Pop. Over 35 arts and culture organizations from our region showcasing their talent with demos, with interactive stations, with performance pop-ups. And we'll have Allison Schutz here as our next visiting artist. She's coming in from New York. She's our atrium artist. So those beautiful Experiment in Gravity, which it really is, that first piece there, and then A Moment in Time as you ascend the stairs. And she is really looking forward to coming to Roanoke, and she will be doing an artist talk on Friday, March 1st at 6:30. So always something going on for the community, for you. And so thanks for being here. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you soon.